All right, man. How you doing?
And use it against the people doing it. We do not need corporations to put a for sale sign on our election doing.
Wait, you can't run down a block like that. Let's go.
Okay, sorry.
We don't need corporations to defy the forces of law and order against the corporate crime wave that has gone across this country.
One or the other.
The corporate crime wave that has looted and drained trillions of dollars.
Hey, Laura.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Corporates, pension holders, 401k possessors, and small investors. We need a new wave of law and order against crime in the streets. Crime in the streets that take far more lives and produce far more injuries and diseases and take far more property than crime in the streets, bad as that is. We should always remember some of the basic figures of corporate criminal negligence, callousness, and indifference. Every year, according to George Bush's OSHA, which he has anesthetized, 58,000 workers die from work-related diseases and trauma. 58,000. Every year, 65,000 Americans die from air pollution. Every year, 80,000 or more die from medical incompetence in hospitals. All those are preventable. They're only preventable if we have a proper and stronger democracy that will impose the health and safety standards to prevent these enormous casualties. Compare that to 14,000 homicides last year, and you'll see that in just those three categories, occupational disease, medical malpractice, and air pollution, the deaths that are preventable, the injuries and disease that are preventable, tower over the wreckage that comes from street crime. And of course, when you come to financial crimes, there's no comparison at all. Take the New York Stock Exchange. What is the New York Stock Exchange? Some people say that it's nothing more than a high-blown casino using other people's money, worker pension funds and trust funds, to negotiate different levels of gambling, different levels of speculation. Originally, the stock exchange was supposed to raise equity capital to fund factories and create jobs and produce products. That's a very minor function now of the New York Stock Exchange. What the New York Stock Exchange represents now is a sophisticated mechanism to fleece other people's money. The level of documentation by the media is enormous here. We live in a period of American history where the mass media and the business media can document the corporate crimes, the frauds, the abuses daily, and nothing happens. Nothing happens to these exposés. There is no response by the political system, the regulatory system. There is no response by the judicial system, the prosecutorial system. That is a symptom of how weak our democracy and how weak our political system has become, because it cannot counteract the abuses of these corporations, increasingly larger and larger global corporations that have no allegiance to our country or our workers or our communities anymore, other than to control them or abandon them as they see fit. Now clearly there are people here on their lunch break, and there are people here who are doing very well. The system helps the top 10% and the top 5%, and helps hysterically the top 1%, whose financial wealth is equivalent to the combined financial wealth of the bottom 95% of all Americans. And it's extremely important. It's extremely important for us to defeat the Bush-Cheney gang in Washington, D.C. by not simply relying on a Democratic Party that has shown us how to lose to the worst of the Republicans at the local, state, and national level, starting here in New York and Albany and Congress, and even losing an election they won in the White House in 2000. Also, it's important. Isn't it amazing that those people who are trying to impede our right of free speech actually agree with us on the issues? They just are members of the unconditional surrender squad, known as the liberal intelligentsia, who make no demands on the Democratic Party to stand up for the people. Justice Louis Brandeis, in the 1930s, Supreme Court Justice, warned the states that they may be creating Frankensteins in their own midst with these corporations. Now we must remember that corporations are not human beings, they're artificial entities. But they have been given all the constitutional rights of real human beings, except the Fifth Amendment, right against self-incrimination. As a result, there's a severe imbalance in the playing field. For a society dedicated to equal justice under the law, you cannot have equal justice between human beings and corporations who can aggregate capital, technology, power, privileges, and immunities, unreachable by even the richest individual in the land. What Louis Brandeis said rings true today, that the excessive accumulation of corporate power is even horrifying some people in the business community. You'll remember the famous Business Week cover in September 2000, which declared too much corporate power, question mark. This is Business Week magazine, the major commercial magazine in the country. It relies on corporate ads. And in 7 pages of detail, the answer to the question, too much corporate power, by Business Week was yes, yes, yes. Too much corporate power over our government. Too much corporate power over our elections, over consumers, over workers, over our environment. And then, in their immortal phrase in an editorial accompanying that cover story, Business Week declared, quote, corporations should get out of politics, end quote. And indeed they should. They are not human beings. They do not vote. They do not have children. They're artificial entities. They must be our servants, not our masters. The consequence of too much power is for all of us to witness around our dear land. The epidemic of institutionalized poverty is before us. Tens and tens of millions of Americans in a period of economic growth unprecedented in history have been left behind. They cannot afford housing. They cannot afford to pay for health care. They cannot afford to support their families on 6, 7, 8, 9, or under $10 an hour, which include 47 million workers in that category. 47 million full-time workers are making Walmart wages without benefits, without job security. These are the workers who keep our country running. Without them, the country would come to a standstill. They harvest our foods. They clean our society. They drive our people. These are the workers who are doing the essential work, and they are paid a poverty wage. And one of the reasons they're paid a poverty wage is that they are not unionized. The Democratic Party has turned its back on the great drive of the American working force to attain unions to represent them against these giant corporations. The Democratic Party will not even stand to repeal the Taft-Hartley law, the chokehold law that has crushed the dreams of millions of American workers who want to engage in the power of collective bargaining against these giant corporations like Walmart and McDonald's and Burger King and Kmart and all the other low-wage giant corporations who are pay their executives millions of dollars. Picture the scene. There are large corporations in this country whose chief executives are making $7,000 an hour on the average, while their workers are making $7 an hour in their company. That means that in one day, that executive makes $56,000, more than that worker will make in 3¼ years of toil, 5 days a week. 50 days, 50 weeks a year. That kind of disparity reflects the concentration of power and greed in our country. One of the themes of our campaign is that we're focusing on unbridled greed, we're focused on unaddressed needs, and we're trying to sow the seeds for the future recovery of our government and our country by the sovereignty of the people over the sovereignty of the corporation. And one way to do this is to strip the corporations of their constitutional rights to personhood. They should not have the legal status of being persons because they're not persons. They're not human beings. As an entity, they must be subordinated constitutionally so that they cannot engage in politics. They cannot finance our campaigns. The people in the corporations, of course, have the constitutional rights to do so, but not the corporate entity, not the corporate entity that organizes these thousands of political action committees and buys and sells our politicians in Washington. There's a new book coming out called Other People's Money. That's the old phrase Brandeis used about a fiduciary duty by corporations to hold that money in trust, to invest that money for a return to the beneficiaries, and to take a reasonable profit in doing so. But Wall Street has been ridden with conflicts of interest, with bribes and kickbacks called retrospective commissions. Wall Street has been ridden with gouging, with secret charges, with betraying the fiduciary relationship, with millions of innocent people out there who through their pensions and trusts and little savings have entrusted Wall Street with those assets. And those assets total trillions of dollars. It is not surprising that the main documenter of the crookedness in Wall Street is the Wall Street Journal itself. The Wall Street Journal itself, apart from its retrograde editorial pages, can be renamed the Corporate Crime Investigative Journal. And of course, its great front page articles that upset people in Wall Street only temporarily, because the political and prosecutorial and regulatory systems are not up to following up after these disclosures. They don't go anywhere. You see things on 60 Minutes in 2020, things in the Washington Post and the New York Times where the reporters work their hearts out for 2-3 months to document the abuse of people in poverty in our inner cities by the predatory lending, the redlining, the payday loans with 400% interest, the rent-to-own rackets, the landlord abuses, and nothing happens. And these are cities very often that have been controlled for years, like Chicago, by democratic political machines. Nothing happens. When nothing happens, we know that our democracy's been undermined and weakened. We cannot respond to these chronic injustices. Alfred North Whitehead, the British philosopher, once said something I always remember. He said the following, and I quote him, "A society is great when its business thinks greatly of its functions." That is not true in the United States of America. Business is not thinking greatly of its functions. And there's a big difference between small business, which is free to go bankrupt when they can't meet the market test, and big business, which goes to Washington for handouts, bailouts, giveaways, and guarantees. And that includes the mighty Citigroup Corporation that was bailed out by Alan Greenspan in the Federal Reserve very quietly in 1990. Business thinking highly of its functions means that they know the limits of its power. They know the limits, they know self-restraint. Every major religion in our world, many, many centuries ago, warned its adherents not to give too much power to the commercial interests, to the merchants, for good reason. Because these commercial interests, once they collide against civic interests, humanitarian interests, once they collide among the interests of workers, once they collide against non-commercial interests, they run them over, they weaken them, they co-opt them, or they destroy them. That's why this election, when it's brought down to its core contradiction, is an election between the tension represented by the politics of corporatism and the politics of populism. And the politics of populism must prevail over the politics of corporatism. One of our phrases that we use in our campaign is we've campaigned from Alaska to Florida and from Hawaii to Maine, all 50 states. One of our phrases is declare your independence. We even have the Declaration of Independence in parchment reproduction for people to obtain from our website, votenader.org. And the reason is because we want people to read the Declaration of Independence and to see its uncanny relevance today to the President and the White House. Half of the complaints that our forebears put to King George III could be put today to President King George II. What Lincoln called the Declaration of Independence, the inalienable rights of human beings. Lincoln called the Declaration of Independence that eternal emblem of humanity, end quote. And oh, how its principles are being driven downward and backward today. The access to our courts is a constitutional right that our forebears fought for. The right of trial by jury. The corporations now are moving to close off the full day in court right of millions of wrongfully injured and defrauded Americans. It's called tort reform. Tort reform is another word that says that the powers of corporatism will move through legislatures to restrict the authority of people to sue corporations, but not corporations to sue people. This is another advance in the privileges and immunities of corporations, a relentless strategy year after year to immunize them from corporate accountability and responsibility, to allow them to privatize their profits while they socialize more and more of their risks on the back of the taxpayers through the government that they control. We should ask ourselves, why is it that corporations spend so much time planning our future? It's called strategic planning. Corporations are planning and have been planning our political future, our job future, our economic future. They're planning our environmental future. They're planning our election future. They've been planning the commercialization of childhood itself through their commercial exploitation of children, separating children from their parents and undermining parental authority. They've been planning the kind of food we would eat, all the way to genetically engineered, chemicalized food. They're planning to take over our public drinking water systems and corporatize our drinking water systems. They're planning our educational future. More and more they're commercializing schools and corporatizing universities. They're even planning our genetic future through the transformation of the genetic inheritance of our planet Earth into 20-year monopoly patents, such as those obtained by Monsanto Corporation and Novartis. Isn't it time for the people of this country to plan their own future in all of these areas? How many times when you put on a little piece of paper where you'd like our country to go and where you'd like our country to be, and ask yourself, are most of the people for this? Is it long overdue? Is it practical? And your answer is a yes, and then you ask the second question, who's saying no? Who is saying no to health insurance, efficient, quality health insurance for all? Who's saying no? It's the drug companies, the commercial HMOs, the giant insurance companies whose stock is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, Cigna and Aetna. And when they say no, 18,000 Americans die every year because they can't afford health care. That's 6 9/11s every year, according to the Institute of Medicine in Washington. And that means hundreds of thousands get sick and stay sicker and aren't diagnosed because they got a commercial health care system that says to them, you pay or you die. You pay or you get sick. There's no other country in the Western world that allows its people to be confronted with that choice of pay or die or pay or get sick. And that's why we have to say to those corporations, you're not going to get away with saying no anymore. You're going to be required to say yes. And that's part of our political movement and the progressive agenda of America. No more cockamamie schemes by Republicans and Democrats that never reach the end of health care for all. Who says no to a living wage? I think most people agree in this country, if you work full time, you should earn enough to support your family with the basic necessities of life. And who's saying no to a living wage? It's the Walmarts and the McDonald's, as I mentioned. It's these corporations that pump money into the politicians' coffers. Every time these corporations say no, the politicians say aye, aye. They say okay. But the people want to say yes. The old song, the people, yes. We must give power to the people, as you will hear soon from Patti Smith singing that wonderful song. The collision between commercial values and civic values has been a long-standing struggle throughout the history of mankind. And we have to give more recognition to the need that if our expectation levels are not rising, they will be driven down by the two parties who are proxies of giant corporations who have turned Washington into corporate-occupied territory, controlling every department and agency in our national capital. Once our expectation levels go down, we settle for the least worst, don't we? And once we settle for the least worst, because we're freaked out by the worst, we don't make demands on the least worst. We give the least worst a free ride. We give the least worst a holiday. My view is this, that because the forces of injustice never take a day off, the forces of justice must never take a vacation and must never be told to do so by tactical least worst mindset. We have now a giant corporation in the White House disguised as a human being. He's called George W. Bush. We have in the White House a messianic militarist, a chicken hawk draft dodger who plunged our nation into war in Iraq on a platform of fabrications, deceptions, and lies. We have a president in the White House who again and again sides with big business against the interests of communities who don't want to be hollowed out by the export of industries and jobs to the communist dictatorship in China that is now being used by large corporations like Walmart as their labor enforcement arm, driving wages down in this country. Imagine the paradox. A conservative, self-styled evangelical Republican president is presiding over, facilitating through his Department of Commerce and in the Treasury Department, and condoning the export of whole industries and jobs from communities in this country to a communist dictatorship in China. I think he ought to be held accountable. I think he ought to be defeated. I think he ought to be sent back to Crawford, Texas. We have gone all over the country. We've gone all over the country building opposition. against Bush, including among Republicans who are increasingly furious with him. Furious because of the deficits that they see as no end to it, as a betrayal of their principles. Furious over the Patriot Act and the big government that they despise and the snooping. Furious over their taxes going to corporate subsidies, handouts, and giveaways. Furious over federal regulation of local school districts so that nonsensical, stupid, bureaucratic, leave no child behind, high-stakes, standardized testing. They don't like that either. They're furious about a lot of things, but the Democrats don't talk to these people. We've been going all over the country saying, how can you vote for President Bush when he votes every day in Washington against some of your most basic principles? And it's important to recognize the following, that in my judgment, and I hope you share it, the only vote you ever waste is the vote for someone you don't believe in, who stands against what you believe in. A vote of conviction is never a wasted vote. A vote of conscience is never a wasted vote. It was the great labor leader, Eugene Debs, in the early 20th century, who said that he would rather vote for a candidate he believes in who loses than a candidate he doesn't believe in who wins, because in the 19th century, all those little parties that pioneered the great social justice of our country, the women's right to vote, the abolition of slavery, the lifting up of industrial labor with trade unions, the farmer populist progressive parties that ushered in federal regulation of corporate abuses, among other things that we now take for granted. They never won a national election. They never came close to winning a national election. But their agenda won. And you know why their agenda won? Because there were enough voters those days who supported them and who rejected the least worst choice between the Republicans and the Democrats, or between the Democrats and the Whig Party on the issue of slavery. They voted for these small parties. And they gave those agendas a chance to struggle and to lose and to fight and to lose again and to fight and to lose again until they prevail. You cannot prevail unless you're willing to lose. I'll never forget a comment by a prosecutor when the corporate crime wave was rising in the last 5 years ago. He said, no matter how complex all these corporate schemes are, no matter how abstruse they appear, it all comes down to lying, cheating, and stealing. And our progressive campaign is designed to put the people back in charge, and it's going to take a while, isn't it? But you don't start something that important unless you're willing to start small. And small is beautiful because small political campaigns have big ideas, big forays of social justice. They're more willing to speak without marbles in their mouths and without corporate handcuffs on their wrists. And I hope that you will look at the Nader campaign as representing two candidates who have fought for 40 years for the rights of all Americans to have a better life, for the rights of minorities to have their right place in our country, for the rights of working families to have a decent livelihood where they can project their children advancing beyond their state in life. Peter Miguel Camejo is the first Latino who is a vice presidential candidate on a significant third party or independent ticket. And he has for 40 years been fighting for the rights of minorities in some of the most gut-wrenching demonstrations, starting with Martin Luther King's demonstration in Selma, Alabama, as a young man. I'd like to briefly list the kind of conditions that would weaken the grip of corporate power on investors and consumers and others, and on our government. We need public funding of public campaigns. We should never allow public elections to be funded by private money. Public elections should not be for sale. We need same day voter registration. We need runoff voting, proportional representation, and binding none of the above. We also need a list of corporate reforms that are listed on our website, votenader.org. And one of them is to strengthen the authority of shareholders, the owners, to control their corporation and not let their corporation be controlled by the board of directors, rubber stamping corporate executives. Another is to expand the prosecutorial budgets. You can see what $63 million at the State Attorney General of New York, Eliot Spitzer, has accomplished. Well, we need a much bigger corporate crime budget in the Justice Department, whose corporate crime unit is smaller than one corporate law firm on K Street, not to mention Wall Street, New York. We need also to recognize that there's no corporate reform movement in this country. We hear about tax reform and welfare reform, however phony they are. Let the words corporate reform ring throughout the country. Let the chattel of corporations be lifted from the necks of the American people. Warren Buffett, the great investor, once said, when asked, what do you think the core of the problem of the recent corporate scandals are? And he said, excessive corporate executive pay. And here's what he meant. When these corporations give themselves stock options, they want to increase the value. To increase the value, they got to increase the value of the stock. Then there is an irresistible impulse to phony up the books, to inflate the profits, to download the debt, and to get the accounting firms to cook the books. And that's when the collapse starts. And that's when all those worker pension funds and jobs and trust funds and investments become very, very shaky. We need to recognize that unless the owners of these corporations control what they own, the corporation leaders at the top will always go over the brink, even if they jump ship at the last moment, bringing their own corporations down in their disgraceful demonstration of greed. We need more corporate disclosure, of course. We need to give workers control of the pension monies they own. There are $5 trillion in worker pension funds invested in the New York Stock Exchange. That's about 30% of the assets of the New York Stock Exchange companies. If workers controlled their pension funds instead of just owned them, if they, through intermediate mechanisms, controlled the investments, and if those investments were in New York Stock Exchange companies, workers would have a very significant controlling interest in the way these corporations behave. We need a national debate on corporate power, fraud, and abuse. And we can get it by supporting this kind of campaign. Here in New York, John Kerry's going to landslide the state. 1.7 million excess voters will go for him. That means New Yorkers are free to vote their conscience. They're free. They are free. They are free to recognize a very interesting point that was said to me a few months ago by someone I never knew. And she came up to me and she said, if you do not vote for what you want, you'll never get it. That's what it really comes down to. And we are there for you to vote for the kind of future direction of our country that demonstrably and its manifestation is supported by a majority of the people, is long overdue compared to other Western countries, and is very practical to implement. And I say that in full confidence that the NADER campaign will be seen in the future as a delineation of America's future. And the other two parties in varying degrees will be seen as pursuing policies and surrendering possibilities that are taking this country backward into the future. Our country goes backward into the future when every year there's more people in poverty, every year more people in consumer debt, every year more people without affordable housing, every year more people whose children are going to bed hungry at night, 13 million of them is the last estimate. Every year more people without health care. That's when the country goes backward into the future. Every year our motor vehicles become less efficient, fuel-wise. Every year the corporate priorities, subordinating the people priorities, are taking our country backward into the future. And only people, as Saul Alinsky, the great organizer in Chicago, once said, the only way to combat organized money is by organized people. Let me end on this note, and I thank you for your patience. We believe that the American people want more voices and choices. They want more voices and choices on presidential debates. I know that because two major polls recently said that 57 and 58% of the American people, Zogby poll and Fox poll, wanted me on the debates. The American people would like more people on the ballot. The Republicans have become very good at keeping voters off the rolls. And the Democratic Party has become very good at keeping candidates off the ballot line, like the Nader ticket. One can forgive a lot in politics. One can forgive the lies, the slanders, the stupid, insipid television ads, but one can never forget or forgive the demonstration of political bigotry by the Democratic Party in the last 5 months that has spent millions of dollars, and hired Republican corporate law firms like Kirkland Ellis of Ken Starr notoriety to keep the Nader ticket off the ballot in one state after another. That is an attack not just on Nader-Camejo's right to be on the ballot. It's an attack on the millions of voters out there around the country who needed and wanted the opportunity to vote for candidates of their choice. And they are now denied because in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Oregon and other states, these dirty tricks, these political bigots have kept us off the ballot, using their own nefarious statutes to do so, as well as intimidating and harassing our signature gatherers. And I want to say to all our volunteers and all our signature gatherers all over the country, you did us all proud. You did us all proud. You were subjected to intimidation and harassment for performing what you thought was your citizen duty. And after November 2, we are going to launch a major drive to get rid of those ballot access laws in the 50 states and replace them with one federal standard allowing more voices and choices. Tonight, we have an election eve rally at the historic Cooper Union Hall, the site of so many people in our past who raised the banner of dissent and rebellion against the injustices and the abuses of concentrated power. We will be there this evening. Patti Smith will be singing there. I'm sorry I misinformed you. She's not here now. She'll be at the Cooper Union tonight. We should forever remember the following observation. In a country that likes to describe itself as a democracy, the protection of dissent is essential because dissent is the mother of assent. Dissent is the mother of assent. The blasphemies of today become the commonplace of tomorrow. Those of you who are interested in more information, there are materials all over there. For those of you who want a respite from soundbite journalism, please visit our website. It's a very exciting, many-splendored website, votenader.org. Unfortunately, we live in an age where communication technology has never been broader. There are more stations, more channels, more ways to communicate to one another, but all we can use are sound bites. And we have this paradox of a society with big bite injustices being subjected to sound bite expressions. So visit our website, have discussions in the next day or so before you vote, take up our 12-er pledge, go to your relatives, friends, workers, and go together to the polls, go together to the polls, and in going together to the polls, you'll develop your own epicenter of civic activity for other purposes and other pursuits. And at the present time, while these executives are ripping off the city, underpaying their property tax in their great buildings, let's support the police here in New York for a decent wage pact under collective bargaining. Thank you very much. Vote NADER Camejo if you're against the war, if you're for a living wage, if you're living health insurance for all, if you want affordable housing, if you want an economy as if people matter, and if you want an election as if votes count, not money nullifying our votes. And as I said, thank you very much. Adelante.
Don't forget the rally tonight in Cooper Union. Patty Smith will be playing. The members of the press will be doing a press conference immediately afterwards, right up here.
Where's the anti-war movement at?
Yo! In the house! In the house!
One time. Bush and Kerry need to know. The occupation's got to go.
The occupation's got to go!
Bush and Kerry need to know.
Bush and Kerry need to know.
Occupation's got to go.
Occupation's got to go.
All right, one more time. Yeah. You have just heard from the only anti-war candidate that's on the platform, and we wonder why. Where's the anti-war movement? We're going to give you some parting words from Leo Tolstoy. He said, for us to struggle, the forces being so unequal must appear insane.
Got this right. I'm just doing audio.
Consider our opponents' means of strife and our own. It is not our intention to fight that would seem absurd, but the thing we mean to fight will still exist. They have millions of money and millions of obedient soldiers. We have only one thing, but that is the most powerful thing in the world, the truth. Therefore, insignificant as our forces may be, in comparison with those of our opponents, our victory is as sure as the victory of light, of the rising sun over the darkness. Where is the anti-war voices? You think about that when you go and hopefully vote your conscience. I'm going to leave you with a one political poem called Vote. Thank you, brother. Vote. Vote for the lesser of two evils. Vote for Enron. Vote for Halliburton. Vote for world domination. Vote for lies. Vote for white supremacy. Vote for the haves and the have-mores. Vote for enforced poverty. Vote for the largest military budget on the planet. Vote for the defense contractors that benefit from war. Vote for Lockheed Martin. Vote for
I meet you down in Texas, Austin. What? I forgot your name.
Vote for billion-dollar fighter planes and starving children. Vote for the creation of terrorism and fair. Vote for the death penalty. Vote for illegal abortions. Vote for black gold, oil that is, Texas tea, Iraqi blood. Vote for no health care. Vote for 30 years of a war on drugs that people have used for thousands of years. Vote for the largest prison system in the world that it created.
Thank you. Take care.
Vote for 5% of the world population using 25% of the world's resources and housing 25% of the world's prisoners. Vote for God to bless America and nobody else. Vote for secret societies and overworked public defenders. Vote for computerized voting machines that don't know how to count. Vote for the electoral college that won't teach you how they count. Vote for the Supreme Court. Vote for the flag. Vote for any white Anglo-Saxon Protestant billionaire that you choose. Vote for a system that you don't believe in. Well, I vote for change in a booth next to you.
Yeah!
For your time, where's the anti-war voices?
In the house!
To remind you guys that NADER is speaking tonight at the Great Hall of the Cooper Union with Patty Smith. It's at 8 p.m. It's at 3rd Avenue and Astor Place. Declare your opinions. Come on out to the rally tonight. We hope to see you there.
And from the Hudson Valley, I'm Don DeBar. With respect to the election yesterday, first I'd like to take people back to the primary season when the one statement that was made by John Kerry that was unequivocal and clear was that he would see to it that every vote counted, that they would dispatch lawyers across the country to protect the integrity of each and every vote. And they're still counting, and he's conceded. Yesterday in Poughkeepsie, the response to the election results and also to the concession by John Kerry was this: protest closing part of Route 9, barred students rally in Red Hook. This is recorded in today's Poughkeepsie Journal. President and former Bard College students took to the streets to protest the outcome of Tuesday's elections, leading to 12 arrests and traffic tie-ups on Route 9. About 100 students sat in the middle of the Route 9 and Route 199 intersection in the village of Red Hook for about 40 minutes yesterday, some shouting and holding signs, others beating on drums. "Not my president, not my war" was one sign. "President Bush is the worst this country has ever seen," said protester and Bard student Gus Feldman, 21, and we're frustrated with John Kerry for conceding. But one of the event's organizers, Bard graduate and Pine Plains resident Brendan Murray Nellis, said they would have protested the war no matter who won. So That's one issue. There is a piece I would like you to look at, and anyone who is so inclined, please, to both fact check and make suggested edits and respond to me at the www.wbai website under commentaries. It's a piece that calls for the removal of Terry McAuliffe as chairman of the National Democratic Party for giving us 4 more years of George Bush, this time with a mandate for war of 97%. That's the aggregate of the vote for Kerry and Bush. Let's see. Officials trade blame for deregistered voters. This is reported in the Times-Herald Record today in Middletown, New York. We have Leslie Weinstein doesn't know whether to blame her local post office or the Sullivan County Board of Elections for what happened on election night. She doesn't know what she saw. I saw people in their 70s and 80s who have lived here all their lives and voted for a half century told their names were off the register. They were devastated and didn't know what to do. Roughly 150 to 200 of the 2698 registered voters in the village of Bloomingburg couldn't vote by machine on election day. We're talking like 6 to 8% of the voters. At 6 a.m., these voters started showing up at the district's 2 polling places and were turned away. Later in the morning, the Board of Elections sent a stack of paper ballots to the polling place so the residents could vote. This went on all over the country, folks, by the way. Constance Poe, 63, was so mad she spoiled her paper ballot, putting down Mickey Mouse and Pluto for president. Why they did it, I don't know. They were stupid or they're not thinking. Nothing Sullivan County does surprises me. This past Sunday, presidential candidate Ralph Nader stopped in Peekskill calling for the closure of the Indian Point nuclear power plants. The first person of national stature to come here and stand in front of the plants and call for its closure. Now that the election is no longer a concern and subordinating all of the issues that we face to electing someone other than Bush is not on the agenda, perhaps we can get some of the top Democrats who hint that they feel this way to come help us close this nuclear power plant. Folks, it's time to organize, and right now, most importantly, it is time to help WBAI pay the bills. Please call 212-209-2950. That's 212-209-2950, and come down and volunteer because we need hands to answer the phones and take in the money. With a report from the Hudson Valley, this is Don DeBar.
We have Leslie Weinstein doesn't know whether to blame her local post office or the Sullivan County Board of Elections for what happened on election night. She doesn't know what she saw. I saw people in their 70s.
Many people